Welcome to LHC Unplugged, where you'll hear unscripted conversations about life, faith, the Bible, and today's world with the pastors from Long Hill Chapel here in Chatham, New Jersey. Ready to grow in your spiritual journey? Let's dive in.
Welcome to LHC Unplugged. I'm Sarah Harrington. I am the Director of Communications here at Long Hill Chapel, and I have our lead pastor, Michael Hoddy, with me today. Hello, Pastor Michael.
Hello, Sarah.
We are in St. Patrick's Day season around here.
St. Patrick's Day season. I did not know it as a season, but here we are.
Here we are. Do you do anything for St. Patrick's Day?
We occasionally will, almost out of religious obligation, will make the food.
Okay.
I am a small part Irish. There are people who really celebrate the daylights out of this holiday who are less Irish than I am. So I think I have enough credibility to speak to St. Patrick's Day. But the kind of the fallback food that everyone makes is corned beef and cabbage.
Yes.
And usually with some soda bread. What do you think of corned beef and cabbage?
I like lettuce instead of cabbage better.
So you like what it's not?
I like corned beef isn't my, I would say, favorite of the meats.
You are incredibly diplomatic.
I am more of a burger, chicken, turkey kind of girl.
I love how you've diverted this. Okay, remember what I said. I'm part Irish, and I can speak to this, and hopefully I won't offend everybody who's Irish. There's so many better choices. Like, you could make so many things. Even when you really, like, my wife Grace is an amazing cook, and she's made it, and it's a little better, but I don't know, and you guys can write into us here at the podcast if you vehemently disagree. I don't know anybody who's like, that's my favorite thing ever. I can't wait for limp cabbage that sort of tastes like corned beef. And even soda bread. Soda bread's pretty good, but there's lots of breads that are better.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think it's more of just the staple of the holiday? Like turkey is associated with Thanksgiving, corned beef and cabbage, St. Patrick's Day.
Don't get me started on turkey. We'll save that one for the fall. I have opinions about all these things, but it shouldn't be like this rite of passage that you sort of have to suffer your way through.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
I'll peek a little bit. I'm not a huge turkey fan. There was this one Thanksgiving, my dad and I was in high school. We looked at each other, and it was just the two of us who said, we're going to make food we like. So we made, we did steaks on the grill, and we did several other things. And it was like my favorite Thanksgiving ever, because we didn't just like tolerate whatever it was. We went for it. And I think the same is true with St. Patrick's Day food.
I mean, you can speak to it. I am not Irish, so I don't think I have any skin in the game here. So we actually don't celebrate St. Patrick's Day, quote unquote, because one of our kids' birthdays is St. Patrick's Day.
That's convenient.
It is. So we do kind of a birthday celebration instead. We don't
great.
Have corned beef.
You do not?
Cabbage, no.
You're not like, hey, happy birthday, here's some corned beef. No. So the other thing that's great about this season is that we can begin to feel spring in the air.
Yes.
And I think we all have our favorite things and least favorite things about that. What are yours?
I would say my favorite things are just like the blossoming of new life. That is the coolest thing to walk outside. And just I feel more invigorated in the spring because of that. I would say, what's your favorite first? Mine is when we start to have warm days.
Like recently, we've had some warm days that the sun is out and it just, there's hope.
Yes.
And the snow melts. I think the same thing for me. I love when the buds come out on the trees. We live near a wildlife refuge, and you can hear all the like little peeper frogs.
Oh,
and it's just all night, you're driving home with your windows open, you hear them. And it's just, there's something about that. There's this this is going to sound incredibly specific, but there's this weird thing where I spend a lot of time hiking and out in nature where the warm air and the cold air mix with each other. Mm-hmm. Like you can kind of feel one, it just changes where you go. There's just something really, really cool about that. But yeah, this is my favorite season of the year.
And baseball. You love baseball.
Yeah, and baseball starts. We shouldn't miss that one at all. That's right. Everything hopeful about that. Unless you're Pastor Joey, who's not here with us today, who knows nothing about anything except for sort of hockey.
Yes, sort of hockey. Now, what's your least favorite thing about the spring?
The flying insects return.
Okay.
This is a wonderful time right now in March because they haven't shown up yet. Like a couple nights ago, we ate dinner out on our deck, and I said, Grace, we've got to do it because the bugs aren't here yet. But then they show up, and you're just doing this constant man versus nature battle with all sorts of flying things. I do not like that.
Yeah, no, that's not fun. I'm kind of on the same with regards to nature is mud and worms.
Does this have anything to do with the fact that you're the mom of 3 boys?
Yes, 100%. Either we're playing with the worms, or we're looking at the worms, or we're touching them, or we're bringing every single piece of mud into the house because now we have indoor mud. Like there's outdoor mud and then there's indoor mud.
Get free.
But that's my rant on spring. But I love spring. Just don't love the cleanup.
Yes, boys are transporters of all sorts of things that are out of place. Worms shouldn't be in the house.
No, rocks, sticks. Yeah. I mean, I could make a list.
But they're going to
for
be
next time.
So.
So we're moving into 1 John 3.
Yes.
And this talks a little bit about hope and assurance. So because we have it, what do we do?
Yeah, 1 John 3, and we talked about this before. John kind of meanders around a little bit, and he kind of has this series of greatest hits that he hits, and then he'll go somewhere else for a little bit, then he'll come back. And it's just his writing style. Everyone has a writing style. And so there's some new things, but there's some existing things that he talks about. And there's this great place that it starts. And it's been one of those images that's really struck with me. In the beginning of chapter 3 and verse 1, he says, "How great the love God the Father has lavished on us that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are." And it tells us 2 things. It tells us that we've been given a lot of something. We've been given a limitless supply of something, and we also have a relationship because of it. We have a family relationship. It's not a conditional relationship. And a lot of the relationships in our world are pretty conditional. Even sometimes what would otherwise be the family relationships. You look at the failure rate of marriages, for instance, and you see that something that was intended to be permanent till death do us part actually isn't. And so we go, I think, by default into our relationships with this idea that they're at risk constantly, that they could change, that we could lose them. And it shows something that I think actually defines a lot of our lives and even our culture and the ways that we strive, which is this scarcity mentality. It's really the idea that there's a limited supply of something and I've got to get mine before it's gone or before everybody else gets it. And that drives people in how they compete, in how they spend, and how nations war with each other. You can go from big to small in how that works itself out. And God sets himself up as the absolute opposite of that. He says, how great is the love the Father has lavished on us. One of my favorite places to vacation when I was a kid was this island in Florida off the west coast of Florida called Sanibel Island. And it was known for its seashells. Okay. And you could collect really beautiful shells there. I grew up off of Lake Ontario, where if you found some like ratty shell every square mile of beach, you'd be very excited about it. I remember the first shell I found, it was pretty awful, but I was very glad because it was like the first one. When you're a kid, there's all these shells and kids' books, and the actual beach is a serious, it's great disappointment compared to that. But I remember the first day, I was 6 years old when we woke up. We had kind of driven in the night before, and we woke up and went out to the beach. And it's literally piles of shells, like the hole down by the water is just all shells. And I went and I got a beach bucket, like one of those little play sand buckets, and I just started scooping them up and bringing them back. And I think over the week that we were there, I learned to be a little more selective and discernment, but I was just blown away with the abundance and that I could scoop for my entire time there and still just barely scratch the surface. And that's really the picture that John's painting. He's saying there is this thing that has been given you in Christ that will not run out, that will not become scarce like everything else seems scarce. And because of that, you can see that relationship differently, but then it takes you somewhere. And that's really where he goes with the rest of the chapter. he goes on for a while, and he goes back to one of his favorite themes, which is loving one another. And he says this. He says you ought to love one another, basically, but then he gives a picture of what that should look like, because I think we all are like, yeah, that's good. I ought to love other people, and they ought to love us, and love, love, love. But he says this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid his life down for us, and we ought to lay our lives down for our brothers and sisters. And so there's this building, kind of this building effect that happens where it's like we have been given this inexhaustible supply of love. Our relationship is certain. One of the things John talks about is the fact that we know how this ends. Christ will appear and we'll see him for who he is. And so we don't have to worry about how it ends. We don't have to worry about what the balance sheet looks like at the end of it. We have as much as we could ever do anything with. And as a result of that, we can live in a way that's different than the people around us. We can live in a sacrificial way because we're not actually giving anything up that we don't get more of. One of the things I've learned is, when you have a lot of something, you treat it differently in how you give it away. If you don't think you have enough, you tend to be very, closed-handed with it and even stingy with it. But if you have a lot, you give it away, and you give it away pretty easily. And that's really the picture that's painted here. But it goes one step further beyond that, because John then says, don't love with words, but with actions. Mm-hmm. Don't just say the thing, do the thing. And love really, when it's worked out, has a price tag associated with it. And I think that's where we fall off. Like we're good with, God has given us everything. He's lavished it. We ought to love other people because the way Jesus loved was pretty awesome. But then there's a price tag that says, we have to give up ourselves. In some cases, we have to die to ourselves and die to ourselves for the sake of other people. And that's where a lot of people get off the bus. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the encapsulation of where John goes next in chapter 3. And he's doing it because that early group of people was really struggling.
Well, it's funny. As you're talking about this, I think a little bit about the pay it forward mentality. Like we hear these awesome stories. Like how does that story make you feel when you hear people were in a drive-thru and this person paid for this person that paid for this? It's like, almost sacrificing for others and providing kind of like you said, that loving one another.
Yeah, I think one of the things that when we look at our world around us, there are not enough people. There's plenty of people who believe the right things about this, but there's a lot fewer who actually do anything about it. Mm. And what happens then, and we can see this really in our world today in any number of ways, is the loudest, most brutal voices win out, because they're just the loudest and most dominant, and they're usually very negative. And so culture becomes a race to the bottom. Mm. It goes down to the bottom. Now, I want to be clear. I don't think in this world is broken and it's fallen and it's always going to be that. And so there's not this idea that if we just love enough and do this enough that all that stuff will go away. Right. But there's a pushback to the narrative that the people of God are supposed to position, which is, how this is, but see the different way of the way of Jesus. And it's in small ways, like you said, but it's also in some profoundly big ways as well.
And what would you say to someone, because you kind of talked about the loudness of those voices, what would you say to someone if they would come up to you and say, Pastor Michael, like, how do I turn those voices down?
You need to fill the space with something else. That I think is really the whole ball game. You can go live under a rock and you can try to avoid those things. And there's, I think, certain things that we should avoid. I really try to limit how much of the news I watch, because one of the things that I think our media has discovered is that rage sells. And it gets clicks and likes and repeats, and it gives you kind of that dopamine cycle, and so you go back for more. And if you see almost the brutality and the violence of our rhetoric and discourse with each other, it's somewhat because of that, and it's also because, like the online space, relationship has been separated from content and from rhetoric. And so you can kind of say whatever you want, and there's no consequences for you really doing that. But the only antidote, and the scriptures talk about this endlessly, is if you stop doing something, you have to start doing something else. If you evict something from a space, you have something else has to move in, or that thing will just come back. And so I would say we ought to really limit, not be blissfully ignorant about everything that's going on. I don't think we're called to do that, because the scriptures tell us to be wise, to be harmless, but to be wise. Wise as serpents, but harmless as doves, as I think the scriptures say. But if we're just overwhelmed and washed over by that, it will really poison the well. It'll actually lead us to apathy and inaction, because we then begin to believe that there's nothing that can change, and what my life is and what I bring to the table just doesn't have any. It's just not nearly enough to do anything about it. So it's meditating on the good. It's reminding ourselves of the lavishness of the love of God. It's doing that on a daily basis, but then it's doing something about it, even if it feels like it's just a drop in the bucket, to live that out in the world. And that's how those voices begin to recede, because I think what happens is we become less attuned to hearing them, and there's other things that are filling the space.
And you said that John talked a lot about love. And one of the things you said in your sermon was that love is faith with consequences.
Yeah, this is kind of a takeoff of that, let's not love just with words, but with actions, with deeds. Another writer in the New Testament, James, he says this in chapter 2, he says, faith without works is dead. And it's the same idea. But faith it's something we believe. We have faith, and faith is really this tension between what we see and what we don't see. So we might see a reality, but we have faith that there's more. It's out in front, or there's more going on, or where this is leading is different than what we see. The writer of Hebrews talks a lot about what faith is in that regard. But faith now is saying there's something that I believe, but even though I don't see it in the world, and maybe this goes back to what you were talking about earlier, if I don't see it in the world, it doesn't mean that I don't start living it now. And so it's when we put a price tag on what we say we believe about God and what we say we believe about God when it comes to other people. It's actually working that out. So faith always has to have feet to it. It has to get out of our minds and our hearts. And I would even say it has to get out of our church buildings, and it has to get into our relationships, into the world, into the difficult places. And again, the reason that we get stuck is because it costs us things. It costs us self-respect. It costs us time. It costs us resources. It just costs us a lot of things, because it's not nearly as easy or as linear as we'd like to think it is.
And it's a hard concept to think. We all know God is always going to provide, right? But when you're living it out, it's sometimes hard to just have that hope, because we all have that human nature in us. That's that logical A to B type of mentality where it's like, but is he really going to provide?
You actually have done a wonderful job of transitioning to the last part of John chapter 3. Good job, Sarah.
Thanks.
There's this section that gets really taken out of context a lot. And it's the end of chapter 23, around verse 21, where John writes, "Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God and receive from him anything we ask." That sounds great.
Yeah.
So if I want a new car, I can go ask God. If I want some more money, I can go ask God. If I want an upgrade in my job or my relationships, I can go ask God. And it's not, well, maybe we shouldn't be asking God for like new cars and a helicopter or something like that. But there's this idea that happens sometimes where we connect the love that God has lavished on us with us getting the things that we want. And we kind of skip over all that stuff in the middle. And so we go from verse 1 to kind of the end of the whole thing. And we miss how that's framed and how that's set up, because what John's saying is he's actually saying exactly what you said. He's saying, as you do this, as you go into situations that seem impossible, as you encounter people that you're just like, I don't have it in me to deal with this. As you look at the world around and say, man, it's getting pretty dark, and I'm just a very, very small single voice in a sea of loud, chaotic, negative voices, that's where the promise of we can go before God and we can ask him for anything. But if our hearts are aligned, if our love looks like Jesus, we're going to ask him for the right things. And those things are not going to be things for us. They're not going to be us getting what we want or getting the more stuff that we want. It's going to be, God, give me what I need to be your light, to be your voice in this situation, with this circumstance, with this person. And that's a promise that God is always faithful to. And it's a prayer I believe he always answers. He may not give us what we want, but he'll always give us what we need.
Well, we always talk about how we have plans and we have this path we want to follow, but that's not necessarily the way it goes. And it's kind of what you're saying. It's like we have to pray or ask a little bit differently. It's not our needs.
Yes, and with faith, because we might not see how it all works out. We might not see the outcome that we want. We might not see it in the time that we want it. And that is the definition of living in faith, that you're waiting for something. You're hoping you see it. You're hoping you can see over the horizon of it a little bit, but you might not. And that doesn't diminish the truth of who God is or the faith in the way that it matters. It just means that what God is doing may be different than what we could see or maybe even what we want at times.
Well, thanks everyone for listening to LHC Unplugged. As a reminder, we meet in person on Sunday mornings at 10:15 at Long Hill Chapel in Chatham, New Jersey. We also live stream our service, so you can also listen online at 10:15 on Sundays at lhcnj.net. And if you have any questions for our pastors to answer on our podcast, you can send them right to us at questions@lhcnj.net. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to having you next time.